Today's story was written by Reddit user G.I. Joe Vibin. The bunker was deep, and a deep bunker, in these trying times, was deeply appreciated. It was, thankfully, comfortable and sturdy, built by some excellent human engineers. How ironic. But it couldn't stop the soldiers in it from being terrified of the artillery barrage raining down upon them. Every shock and tremor of the shells reverberated through them. If you placed your head down, you could feel all 4 of your eyeballs vibrating in tune with the blasts. It had all unravelled. The initial assault on Earth, where they had gained so much territory, so many victories, so quick, carving a path through the United States so effortlessly. Then they began to be slowed, and finally checked. The meat grinder at New York, one that couldn't be fully broken even by the nuclear hammer, counterattacks by determined human forces across every front, constant insurgent activity, and mysterious sicknesses ravaging the lines, alleged in hushed voices to be the result of human bio-warfare. Even landings elsewhere across this damn planet had failed to break the deadlock, being met with determined resistance. Patty Oxley had, of course, realised it was all coming undone earlier than most. His unit had been on the Chicago axis of the assault, and had stalled in the desperate room-to-room fighting. Command had to break out the nukes there too, and yet progress had continued to be measured in meters, not miles. Now the humans were on the counterattack, constantly hacking their way in. No matter how many of their cities were consumed by nuclear fire, the fighting continued, and the situation never seemed to get better. Rotations were gradually getting worse, both in quantity and quality. It didn't help that every time a food delivery did arrive, the local human civilians would immediately protest that they deserved a peace, or else the partisans might just step up their work. Quite how they could get any more dangerous was beyond Patty Oxley. But the threat was a threat. Also, besides, their mission was supposed to conquer, not exterminate, no matter how many nukes they popped off. So they were forced to divert a portion of their meagre rations in a doomed bid at keeping the humans happy. Reports of defeatism in the ranks were now totally irrelevant, because there were simply so many reports that it became meaningless. If you went around Patty Oxley's unit, you would struggle to find a single soldier who still believed in the cause of this war. Rumours of soldiers refusing to fight, of mutinies, of outright rebellion and defection abounded. But nothing ever seemed to change in terms of how the Imperium pursued it. Certainly, they were killing many human soldiers, both uniformed and partisan, but it never seemed to affect the numbers that kept coming. The wait for the final collapse of the Imperium forces had taken on something of an inevitability. For the Hecatian soldiers in the bunker, seized as a command post from the humans, they occupied themselves as best they could. Some maintained their plasma rifles, others tried to sleep, many cried. Several sat together, bottles of human liquor piled up around them, an irresistible attraction under the circumstances. A few of the officers had been in previous wars against primitives, and never had seen anything like this. Only one of them had been an officer back then though, the rest had been promoted to fill the boots of dead men. They had done their best, successfully leading Patty Oxley and his fellow soldiers in the on-foot retreat towards St. Louis. But they knew as well as he did that when the artillery stopped and the human counter-offensive came to this front, they would all last mere hours at best. Sat beside Patty Oxley in his chair were 2 stacks of leaflets, surprisingly neatly arranged. The first were the leaflets distributed by Imperium Command, promoting the cause of the war as just denouncing the humans as barbarians who would annihilate the Imperium if left untouched. The first part Patty Oxley could definitely see, but he was increasingly getting the feeling that they had only made things worse by invading. The other stacks were leaflets made by humans. They were constantly finding these ones scattered around on the surface, and only rarely did they find the humans responsible for distributing them. Unsurprisingly, they had executed them. It had not slowed their speed. This propaganda was always greeted with great disdain, but it was increasingly starting to resonate. Their warnings that the Hecatean forces were losing the war weren't exactly easy to refute, and every so often, Oxley would catch telltale signs that a battle armour-wearing individual had studied the paper intensely before adding to the pile. If any officer had asked, they would be told that the pile was simply storage for things to write upon, to shred to make insulation, or perhaps for use in the bunker's toilet facilities. But none did ask. They all knew the truth behind it. The information on the reverse side, explaining how to surrender to a human force, was simply too tempting. And the leaflets were an eternal reminder that the dictates of the Imperium were more and more hollow. The pretense that the Imperium's military was unbeatable had collapsed. Claims of superiority over pre-FTL species had gone up in smoke. Yes, the leaflets were a humbling pile, a helpful reminder of just how badly they had done, even as the soldiers waited to be overrun. Oh, sure, the soldiers were subject to many lengthy speeches on their personal comms devices, messages from their commanders about how they were defending the Imperium, and all that standard stuff. But after the commander-in-chief of the whole war, Ekretlin, had been captured during the New York debacle, it was increasingly conspicuous how absent so many commanders were from the vicinity of the front line, and that their new commander-in-chief was dictating the war from a spaceship in orbit of Earth itself, allegedly skirting human defences. Oxley thought about that leaflet again, the cartoons on it, extremely crude ones dotted with labels, showing a human's vague concept of what the Emperor looked like. He was shoveling even cruder drawings of Hecatean soldiers into some sort of contraption. On the other end of the contraption came an unappealing looking product that had been labelled mince in one of the human languages. Oxley certainly didn't intend to give the human designer much credit for subtlety or artistic talent, but it was hard not to think about, and those surrender instructions? Not one soldier lacked courage. Absolutely not. Their fight across Chicago had proven that. But then, neither had the Hecateans at New York, and they had been soundly defeated. Courage did not mean suicidal behaviour in war. Every Hecatean soldier was undoubtedly the superior of their human foes, often in training, always in equipment. But the humans had numbers. They had prepared, and they had sheer bloody-mindedness on their side. This bunker, now serving the Hecateans so well, was proof enough of the depth of preparation. Oxley had no doubt there were more in the area, that the guerrillas would be using to launch attack after attack on the Hecatean forces. There was a heavier thud, and the bunker rocked more than usual. Everyone looked up at the ceiling, no matter what they were doing. But it held, instead of caving in and releasing them from this war. If Oxley had to guess, it had been a bunker buster, unleashed from an aircraft some way away. What a true failure of their air units, that they couldn't even keep the skies under their control. The rumbling carried on, and Oxley could have sworn he heard the screams of a bunker collapsing in on its Hecatean inhabitants. Or maybe not. Maybe that was just his imagination. He could no longer guess. It was certain the target was either his unit or another nearby unit though. A pity it wasn't his commanders, but they were probably far too out of range of even the best human jets. Oxley picked up a leaflet from the first stack and headed for the toilets. At least they'd get some use today.